Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Scott. All right. Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Keagan Carlson. I work for Region 1 Planning Council. Um, and today, yeah, like Scott said, I'll be going over our regional water quality report for the Rockford region. So, I'll start off just with a little bit about R1. I know we've worked with most of you guys, and a lot of you guys might be familiar with what we do, but for those of you who might not be, we are a regional government agency. And um, so we have a couple organizations under our umbrella. The MPO, which I work for, is the arm that funded the creation of this report. That is on the map here. You see the blue area. That is the study area and the area which our MPO covers. We also have the Economic Development District, the Regional Land Bank, Winnebago GIS, and we offer a lot of different planning services in a lot of different sectors. Um, So with that, the water quality report is a consultant-led study that we contracted out to A3 environmental consultants. It was so written for R1 by A3. It's aimed at increasing public and stakeholder understanding of where our water comes from and what affects its quality, and also at supplying planners and professionals with local data just in a more central location. I will note that it's not an action plan per se, so it's not exhaustive in its recommendation. And much of the reasoning for this report, why we wanted to do it, is data on water resources, as many of us know, comes from a lot of different sources. It's very spread out. So we just wanted to try and get that all into one sort of comprehensive document as best we could. And so, like I mentioned A3, and then also us. Some other contributors to the report was Place Foundry, Boone County, Winnebago County Soil and Water, the City of Rockford Public Works, and also the Public Library. So it was a very comprehensive effort in putting this report together. So I guess a little bit of a disclaimer, I've kind of lied to you guys. It's not necessarily one report, it's actually two reports. There's a public report, which gives a little bit more of a broad overview of water topics in a way that's digestible for the public and allows the public and sort of decision makers to read through it and get all the information they need. And then the technical report contains a lot more detailed explanations of water topics and is intended for more technical readers, and which is kind of what I'll be focusing on in this presentation. So One Water, if any of you guys have looked at our webpage, Scott sent out the link for it. No worries if you haven't, but there's a lot of mentions of integrated water resource management, also known as One Water. And this is sort of a new emerging theme in planning, or maybe approach would be a better word. Essentially just looking at water as one connected system rather than viewing it separately through the lens of the different forms of, stormwater, groundwater, surface water and wastewater, and also how it interacts with land uses. It just looks at all through one use or as one resource, which makes it a lot easier to understand how water, land, and all our other resources interact and impact each other. It's important to keep in mind because the Rockford region, it's rather unique for a developed area as it has a good blend of natural areas and green spaces along with the urban development that we have. So land use is one of the most significant determinants of water quality, which feels a little strange to say, but natural spaces, they capture and store water, acting as filters to stop the spread of pollutants. Urban development comes in and replaces natural spaces with impervious surfaces like roads and buildings and parking lots and everything like that, which as illustrated by this graphic, blocks stormwater from infiltrating into the ground. Impervious surfaces also allow water to pick up pollutants on its way to our natural waterways, versus where natural spaces just allow or just capture water where it lands before it can gather pollutants. And so these impervious surfaces, they redirect water to our streams, rivers, and lakes, which leads to increased risk of flooding and also depletion of groundwater resources in areas where aquifers rely on stormwater for recharge. And so I mentioned previously that our region is rather unique in its blend of green spaces. And in natural areas, and which is why I wanted to include these aerials of Rockford, because even though recharge may not be a large concern yet for us, we've slowly been covering a lot of the recharge areas with impervious surfaces as the region continues to build out. You'll see evidence by Rockford and Loves Park sort of slowly creeping west over time, and then also just the expansion of Belvedere. So as I've touched on a little bit, different types of land use affect water in different ways. So natural areas capture stormwater, as I've said. Urban areas redirect it. Pollutants from agriculture uh, can find its way into waterways, and those are just a few examples of different land uses and sort of the impacts they can have. Um, and so you can see here in Rockford, the Rockford MPA is about 435,000 acres in size. About half that is cropland and used for agriculture. About a quarter is urban areas of development, so like downtown Rockford, Belvedere, a lot of our suburban neighborhoods, and then the rest is natural areas, grassy areas, and pasture. So the reason land use is so important to look at is because it's really our best method we have of understanding where non-point source pollution comes from. Because non-point source pollution is what I've mentioned so far with the stormwater runoff is of a lot greater concern uh, due to the difficulty to trace and regulate. It accumulates from a variety of different sources. It's carried by stormwater runoff, contains things like nutrients, sediment, emerging contaminants, sorry, like PFAS, microplastics, fecal matter, bacteria, lead, things like that. Versus point source pollution, it's much easier to trace and regulate as discharge from places like wastewater and industrial facilities. They have to apply through the Clean Water Act, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and then these points where this point source pollution is emitted is tracked, as you can see from this map here. So when it comes to groundwater specifically, our region relies on three primary sources. I know Scott's covered this graphic on the left a little bit in one of his recent presentations, so I won't get too into the details of it, but it's still important to cover, of course. And so the first source is shallow sand and gravel aquifers, known as also referred to as shallow alluvials or river deposited aquifers, glacial deposits. These are shown in the brown near the surface in this graphic. There's shallow bedrock aquifers. These are the carbonates shown in gray, most notably the Galena-Platteville system locally. And then there's deep sandstone aquifers, which is where we get the majority of our water. And these are shown in blue. And these are the St. Peter and Ironton-Galesville sandstones locally. In terms of the graphic on the right, most of our region sits above aquifers that supply drinking water. So in brown, you'll see the major sand and gravel aquifers. If I'm not mistaken, this includes both shallow alluvials and deep sandstones, like the St. Peter and the Ironton-Galesville systems, which lie directly below the shallow sand and gravel aquifers. You can see that both of these lie in our river valleys. So there's the Rock River and then also the Kishwaukee River. And the shallow alluvials provide water for small households, farm, and irrigation in our region, and play a pretty massive role in recharging the deeper sandstone aquifers, which, as I mentioned, are our main source of water. So in gray, also, you'll see the major bedrock aquifers. These equate, or yeah, sorry. Water flow here depends on how much the rock is cracked or fractured. And it's the source of private wells in our more upland areas. So in terms of drawdown, geology is very important to look at. It's the main contributor to drawdown, really. And this is because of transmissivity. This how easily water can move through rock and soil. And so higher transmissivity equates to a better supply of water. And so you can see from this graphic on the bottom, or from the graphic on the right, the one on the bottom left. The deep sandstone aquifers supply a steady, very steady, reliable source of water. And so these are the St. Peter and Ironton-Galesville. systems. And the shallow sand and gravel on the top left. These can be very high transmissivity, but not everywhere. In our region, they are very transmissive, which is, like I mentioned, or which bodes well for our region because shallow sand and gravel aquifers, like I mentioned, recharge the deeper sandstone aquifers. And this can really be seen through an analysis that was done of wells in the region by the Illinois State Water Survey. And so wells located in the Rock River Valley, like wells number 1 and 6 shown in red on the graph, they sit on top of the shallow alluvial system, which sits above the deeper sandstone aquifers. And precipitation infiltrates very easily here and then leaks down and recharges the deeper sandstone. So the 2 wells analyzed in the report have shown less than 50 feet of drawdown over 70 plus years. And wells outside of the valley, like number 30 shown in green, sit on top of the Galena-Platteville limestone system, which overlies the deeper sandstone and acts as sort of a barrier. This can be seen by the well analyzed in the report number 30, having experienced over 100 feet of drawdown in less than 45 years. In terms of the status of the Rockford region as a whole, it currently displays some of the more sustainable groundwater in the region, according to the Illinois State Water Survey. Much of this can be attributed to our watersheds recharging the deeper sandstones. And out of 23 Rockford wells analyzed, 5 had increasing water levels, 8 were stable, so 7 showed decreasing water levels, and 3 had no clear trend. So more than half of them showed increasing or stable levels, and only 7 had decreasing. Additionally, Rockford's water pumping has declined by half since 1979. Combined with our geological advantages, have allowed us to keep our water levels relatively stable. So for drinking water, I don't have a ton to talk about here. The technical report, in the report, it offers a breakdown of all of our local municipalities, their most recent consumer confidence reports, which are annual reports that they have to put out that provide detailed information about the sources of our drinking water, how it's treated, what contaminants were detected during monitoring, if there were any. So like I said, I won't go over these, but a summary of the findings that most our local utilities meet federal and state drinking water standards. But like most communities across the country, we do face challenges like PFAS contamination and aging infrastructure. An example I have here of sort of what local water utilities are doing to address aging infrastructure. The city of Rockford's water division, you see from this graph, this was where this graphic was sourced from. This graphic shows lead pipes in the area, and so the lead pipe systems are shown, or lead service pipes are shown in red. The blue are unknown, green are non-lead pipes, and orange are galvanized. In the city of Rockford, their water division, they have a plan in place to replace over 30,000 lead pipes by 2037. This is funded through a variety of different methods, but I believe it's over $5 million a year for the next 2 years, and then jumps to $50 million a year, which is a huge number. And so don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it is. For surface water, we've talked about this a little bit with the 303D list, and so that's where this is pulled from. Not the most recent one, but these are the 2024, 2022, and 2018, I believe. And so what this found was that there are 26 impaired stream segments, equating to about 269 miles of waterway in our MPA. Of the streams assessed, there were 9 within boundaries of a TMDL, the total maximum daily load. 36 of the impairments, or there was 36 impairments through the 26 streams, and 10 of them had existing plans in place to address. There were 10 different pollutants detected throughout the 26 stream segments. The most common were fecal matter, mercury, and PCBs. None of the streams had a probable source of pollutants identified, or I guess identified where these pollutants were originating from. And 6 of the impairments did not have an identified issue. And so here, this is a list pulled for the Kishwaukee River, specific to our MPA, I believe. But this table is also given in the technical report for Pectana and Lower Rock watersheds. What you'll see here, there was 25 designated uses assessed, so not all the designated uses for each stream were assessed as part of this. 13 of them were designated, or the designated uses were in good standing, and 12 of them were impaired. All the segments assessed had at least one impairment. Mercury, PCBs, and fecal matter were the most commonly identified issues, which is relatively common from what I understand for most waterways that are impaired. And fish consumption and primary contact were the 2 most common designated use impairments. And like I said, not all the designated uses were assessed, so there's possible that if they were assessed, there could be impairments or they'd be in good standing. It's hard to know without having that data. And so shifting gears a little bit, but along the same lines, the IDNR does stream classifications. The data collected for these was done from 1997 to 2007. So it's a little out of date, but still very useful to look at. And basically, as part of these stream classifications, the IDNR, they give out grades of A through E to streams based on biodiversity and integrity, biodiversity being the number of species and integrity being a measure of how much impact humans have on natural ecosystem functions of the various streams. And the data is collected from fish, mussels, and macroinvertebrates. And they're looking to get a measure of overall habitat quality. So 25 streams were graded as a part of this, or 25 local streams in our MPA. It was part of a much broader report, but 18 of these 25 were graded A through C for diversity, and 23 were graded A through C for integrity. There was one designated as biologically significant. That was Lower Beaver Creek. Biologically significant meaning it has has high diversity and high habitat quality, as well as a presence of endangered and/or threatened species. The South Branch Kishwaukee River received A's for both diversity and integrity. It was the only one in our region that did. And Killbuck Creek received the only E in our region for its integrity, and also a D for diversity. So just a stream segment, I guess, to look out for. And these 3 that I called out here, you can see them here. But these 2 maps overall, they show the streams that were graded. And so on the left are the biodiversity ratings, and on the right are the biological integrity ratings. And the color scheme is pretty intuitive here, thankfully. So the dark green is A, and then red is E. And so Lower Beaver Creek, which you can see from this arrow on the most top arrow, the arrow in the middle of the MPA, the middle right. As I mentioned, this was determined biologically significant, which is given to the top, or given to 9%, I believe, or the top 9% of streams in terms of habitat quality. The South Branch Kishwaukee River is the big red arrow in the middle where Winnebago, Boone, Ogle, and DeKalb all meet. And Killbuck Creek is the double arrow here on this graphic on the right. It's down in Ogle between 39 and 251, travels through Lindenwood, just to get an idea of where these are. And so a little bit about sort of some conclusions drawn in our report. Not necessarily, I guess, conclusions, but things identified. So there's a lot of gaps that exist in the data. Like I mentioned, the data comes from a variety of different sources, and it's very spread out. And despite the amount that is accessible about our water quality, there's a lot still unknown. It's very unorganized, and there's a lot still left to be researched. And so most currently available water quality data is funded by government agencies and done in sort of a piecemeal fashion. For example, the data in the water quality report was compiled from TMDLs, watershed plans, the Section 303D list, USGS data, the IDNR, Illinois State Water Surveys, and there's a few more sources too. In the case of surface water, I've touched on this a little bit already, but the data we do not, or the data we do have is not comprehensive. So the 303D list is one of the most extensive resources for the state, but it only covers navigable waters, and they're not all researched or reassessed for each use during each cycle. And the list depends on data supplied by other agencies, which can sometimes be data that's out of date or old. In some cases, up to 15 years old, I believe, is the cutoff there. In terms of TMDLs and watershed plans, these provide very extensive information and are very useful to specific watersheds, but they are specific to specific watersheds, so they're not comprehensive in an entire area or region. In our region, our TMDLs and watershed plans only cover about the northern third of our region, which I'll show in a map on the next slide. And for NPDES outfalls, or the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, these are the outfall locations that I showed earlier. There's little data for those aside from where they're located, so it's difficult to determine their impact on the local water quality without more information about the practices and discharges themselves and what's being discharged. For groundwater, the current info is limited to a few studies and usually based on low resolution data for the most part. I mentioned earlier that 13 of our wells had increasing or stable water levels and 7 were decreasing. It's hard to know why that is for each specific well or what it means and sort of the impact it has on us without understanding the geology of each well. And that's why studies like what Boone County is doing are so important to the region. With their 3D map, it'll just help us understand and help them understand what's going on in all the aquifers and around each well. And also with their sensitive recharge area maps, they're not currently available for any other counties, but recharge areas can be estimated by location of shallow sandstone aquifers where the underlying ground is porous. And so these are very helpful to get, as Dan Kane has gone through before, just to get that at least the overview and establishment of where critical recharge areas are in the region. And so some things that can be done to address this is, like I said, like what Boone County is doing is great. And also by continuous monitoring of well water levels, instead of kind of now how it's done is every so often it'll happen, but continuous monitoring of these well levels to better understand depletion and recharge trends that occur. For drinking water, the data is honestly pretty comprehensive for our municipal sources. But private wells, they're not required to be monitored and therefore tend to not be tested as often. And it's completely up to the usually homeowners who have their own wells or apartment complexes and things like that who have their own wells. It's up to them to get tested. So there's a lot of gaps in the data from those wells. And so like I mentioned, this report really, it's not a plan per se, but if you were looking for if there was what do we do with all this information kind of slide, this would sort of be it. So the Illinois State Water Survey projects that the state could require 20 to 50% more water in coming decades. So now is a good time to start trying to fill in the gaps in data so that we can be ahead of the curve in planning or adapting to any changes instead of having to scramble sort of when the bill is on the table. Through this committee, we've heard about a plethora of local initiatives underway to address many of these existing gaps that I've mentioned. So there's various planning initiatives, green infrastructure projects, research studies, and a lot of collaboration, which is evidenced by this committee being formed and meeting today. And so in terms of planning initiatives, just there's, this water quality report. From our end, we have our Green Streets plan, we have our climate action plan. Boone County is this regional stormwater management technical subcommittee that Dan has talked about on here. Last meeting, Sean Von Bergen talked about the Winnebago County Highway Department's plans for Madigan Creek restoration and a couple of their other green infrastructure projects that they've completed and are potentially eyeing. And Boone County's 3D mapping also. And so in terms of sort of some recommendations identified, there's currently a lot being done in the area of water, but there's still a lot more that could be focused on. And so some key points of emphasis that were identified are preservation and restoration, mitigating impacts of impervious surfaces and agricultural runoff, focusing on groundwater quantity and quality improvements, implementing the IEPA recommendations that they give out. And these are associated with the 303D list. And local government, they can identifying things like grants and for planning also. And so I'll go through a little bit of these individually. And so for preservation and restoration, it's very important to maintaining water quality. As I mentioned in one of my earlier slides, natural areas are very important to capturing stormwater and recharging our aquifers. And so this can be attained by incorporating green infrastructure and best management practices. Also by putting more land under protection to remain as natural land, like forest preserves, parks, conservation districts. For mitigating impacts, in terms of impervious surfaces specifically, green infrastructure, again, and considering it more as a priority design element instead of trying to retrofit streets can be very useful. And the good thing about green infrastructure is that private landowners as well can incorporate this into their land. And so through things like sustainable materials used for sidewalks or driveways, as well as incorporating rain barrels or in rain gardens. In terms of agricultural runoff, specifically, green infrastructure, again, riparian buffers and implementing regenerative and sustainable agricultural practices. For groundwater quality and quantity improvement, protecting recharge areas from new contamination sources, and also identifying them so that we know what needs to be protected. Monitoring the groundwater levels to ensure pumping doesn't harm our stream ecosystems or that we're not over pulling from our wells, as well as continued investment in treatment infrastructure. For local governments, I mentioned that there's a few things they can implement. And so these are, I mentioned going after things like grants, but also they can implement rules minimizing the use of pollutants in various areas. So things like fertilizers, pesticides, and detergents. You can invest in sustainable initiatives in the area, as well as supply tax breaks or subsidies for sustainable developers to come in and build sustainable developments. For planning, I'm probably a little biased, but I think it all sort of starts with planning. In order to implement these recommendations, we need to conduct studies to address these gaps in data, or the gaps that exist in the data, and then identify areas of the greatest need. And from there, that's when we can implement and create our action plans. And then after those are created, obviously the implementations can go. And so I think, again, I'd like to point out Boone County. I think they're really a great example to look at of this. They're doing everything they can to gain an intimate understanding of their water supply, which is very crucial to know. And the best case is, I suppose, that there's nothing to worry about and there's no changes that need to come or implementations that need to be done. And in worst cases, they can, with knowing what is going on, they can implement the strategies and prepare these strategies. All right. And so with that, thank you guys. Thank everyone. Thank you for listening. I recognize that I threw a lot of information at you guys. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or or I provided my contact information as well. So please feel free to reach out.